What if the person you think you are is just a fraction of who you truly are? What if years of conditioning and surviving in a challenging world have left you clinging to strategies and beliefs that mask your truest nature? I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A show that looks beneath our psychological masks and uncovers our profoundly messy, beautiful, brilliant, tender-hearted selves. Join me as we go in search of the hidden power of our true selves. I'm so glad you're here.
Good evening, and you know I'm so glad to be here. You know this is the highlight of my week. I'm Catherine Duca, psychotherapist and self-esteem coach, and I want to welcome you to Who Do You Think You Are? This is a podcast that is dedicated to helping you have the highest regard for yourself. Here we talk about ways to enrich your inner sense and your deepest sense of self-worth and self-esteem and self-love. Here we talk about how to make ourselves a priority in our own lives. Meet me here each week for curated tips and strategies designed to help you drop your psychological masks, or at least loosen them a bit, connect with your truest essence, and simply live life more easily. Why? Because we know that when we approach life in this way, we naturally and organically and effortlessly have more room, more generosity, and more love for others. And isn't that what the world needs now? So, welcome, all of you. I have to say that I am feeling a little green behind the gills tonight. I had 2 vaccines the other night. I'm going to be doing some traveling in the next few weeks. And so I got 2 vaccines at the same time. I recommend you think twice before doing that. It has had me down for the count, and I still feel a little something. So I hope you'll bear with me tonight if I am not quite myself. But you can help me along by participating in the chat if you're so inclined. I love questions. I love comments. I love your insights. So let's make this as interactive as possible. I think that will help me with the greenage around the gills. So if you've been joining me the past few weeks, you know that we have been talking about our psychological masks and how to drop them, or if not drop them completely, loosen them a bit, maybe just around the edges. Why is that important to have flexibility with our masks? Well, first of all, we know that masks are the psychological camouflages, if you will. They are our personality traits that help us project a certain image to the world. It's the way in which we want to be viewed by other people. So we project this image vis-a-vis the use of certain masks. And we've talked about a few of them. The mask of the perfectionist, the mask of the person who says, I'm fine. What else have we talked about? The mask, perhaps, of the apologizer, the mask of the overly competent or overly self-reliant person. And these masks are, the idea is not to get rid of them completely. And in fact, that's virtually impossible because these masks are our personality traits. But the idea in talking about loosening them and being more flexible with them is because these masks represent our identity. And if we are so rigid with our identity traits that we can't be fluid or we can't be flexible, we must be this way or else, then life can feel more difficult than it has to. So in talking about who do we think we are, we have the opportunity to discover a paradox, really. And that is that the parts of ourselves that exist beneath these masks. These are the aspects of our personality that we determine are unlikable, unattractive, bothersome, um, perhaps unlovable. We determine that. We judge these traits to be in those categories, if you will. And therefore, what do? Well, most of us hide. We hide those qualities. We detach from those qualities. We suppress those qualities. And we do our best, consciously or otherwise, to polish and perfect our mask, our public image. And the interesting thing about that is that that creates a gap between what we show to the world and how we show up in it and who we truly are. And depending upon how wide that gap is, that's going to have a bearing on how difficult life is. That's going to be where and how we can feel like an imposter. And if you've ever felt like an imposter, it's not a good feeling. It's an unpleasant feeling, because when you feel like an imposter, what is it that you worry about? You worry about being discovered as such. And so I would say, from talking to my clients all these years and from research and from my own life, one of the scariest things that we walk around with is the fear of exposure, the fear that others will find out what it is we don't like about ourselves, what it is we've lived through that we may feel ashamed of. We're afraid someone's going to detect what exists beneath that mask. And so we try and try and try. And in fact, this is why many people come to psychotherapy to begin with. We try to perfect that mask. And many of my clients call me when they feel that there's been a crack or some cracks in their mask. And they don't necessarily state it this way. They don't say, Kathy, help me put my mask back on or help me tighten it up. But they tell me that, in so many words, that there's a leak and things are oozing through, parts of themselves, aspects of themselves, traits, behaviors, reactions, and they don't like that. So in essence, they're asking me to help them put their mask on even more tightly than before. And they quickly find out that we don't do that in psychotherapy. What do we do instead? We go in pursuit of the truths, the genuine traits that live below the surface. And why should we bother doing that? Well, if you've been listening, you know that's because these traits that we may label as undesirable really contain hidden gifts. Hidden gifts. Some might say gold. Now, you might ask, how is that possible? How, don't we all want to put our best, our best foot, our best face, into the sunshine? Don't we want people to see our best qualities rather than our worst? Well, yes, of course. But the problem behind that is that if we do that long enough, we then become strangers to ourselves. And we become actually estranged, is the word I tend to use, from these deeper qualities. And if we allow ourselves to get curious and to get even vulnerable around these hidden qualities, we find, and I'll be talking about this, we find that there is actually an energy that gets freed up. There are insights that come to the surface, realizations, and we actually have more power, not less. And one of the things I want to say at the outset that I'll be diving into is then we don't have to live in fear of being exposed. Because when we look at ourselves truthfully and we handle the truth, what was that movie? You Can't Handle the Truth, Son? A Few Good Men, is that what that was? Well, when you can handle the truth about who you are and handle the truth about where you've come from and what you've survived, there is actually mastery in that. You no longer have to look over your shoulder, in a sense. You no longer have to live in fear that you'll be found out. You no longer have to spend energy polishing this image. And when we can live in that space, we feel more self-assured. I could tell you, we feel more self-affirming. We have more self-respect for ourselves. And life just feels easier because we're more integrated. The parts of ourselves are more homogenized. We're not pretending to be a certain way. We're not protesting that we're not this way or that way. We can be who we are. So this is the whole idea behind masks. And everything I say tonight and actually every night is not against anyone. You know, when I say in the introduction that this podcast is dedicated, among other things, to helping you be a priority in your own life, that is not to say you indulge the me of life. It is not to be self-absorbed. It is to be insightful. It is to develop your emotional intelligence, your emotional depth. So everything I say here is never, ever, ever against anyone else. It is always and only in the provision of taking care of you and being your best version and not hiding and not lying to yourself and not denying the truth of who we are. Because when we come out from under that weight, we feel better. We have a lighter step, a lighter touch. Our language is different. Our posture is different. The muscles in our, all around us, the muscles behind our eyes, in our cheeks are more relaxed. We're more likable. We're more approachable. We're easier to be with. I mean, isn't that worth the investment of looking within? I think so, and I hope you do too. So that brings me to tonight's mask. And we are going to be looking at the mask of the rescuer. The mask of the rescuer. Now, what does that look like? And what is the calling card of the rescuer? Well, first of all, the rescuer, the love language of the rescuer is, hey, what do you need? What can I do for you? I'll drop everything. I'll drop everything to be there for you. No request is too big. Beyond that, me, I don't really need anything. It's what I need is to make you happy, is to do for you. This is the calling card of the rescuer. What can I do for you? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Kathy, what is the problem with helping others? How could helping somebody out of a jam or a predicament possibly have a downside? Well, the answer is nothing is wrong with that. And not only is nothing wrong with helping other people, I believe it's what we're here to do. I believe our consciousness should be broad enough and deep enough that we have an understanding, a respect, and a need to care for one another. So let's lock that in. The problem with the rescuer, as with all of the other masks, is that if it is so rigidly in place that we believe we must be that way, and in fact are that way on autopilot, then we can never allow ourselves to be any other way. And when we're always in the giving mode, always in the protective mode of other people, and we're not doing that for ourselves, well, you can see quite readily how imbalanced that is. And beyond that, how can anybody give us anything ever? How can anyone take care of us? How can we lean on anyone if we don't have any needs? Now, last time I talked about the mask of I'm fine, which overlaps with the mask of rescuer, but there are differences. So if you're thinking, gee, this sounds familiar, you're right, it does, but there are added nuances to the mask of rescuer. So let's talk about how this, and I want you to think of the word compulsive, because that's the thing about these masks. We feel compelled to behave in this way. And all the way in the back of our minds, uh, we can feel like, I have to be this way or else. I have to be this way or else people will think I'm needy. I have to be this way or else people will find out that I don't have everything as perfectly polished as I want people to think. So it's really it's the rigidity and the intensity of and the inflexibility of the masks that make it problematic. Okay. Now, before I actually launch in, I'm noticing there's some activity in the chat. Let me see what's happening here. Just Judy, welcome. Good to see you. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're toughing it through tonight. Okay. Well, actually, I'm feeling better already now that I'm getting into this groove. Thank you, Judy. Still, Bill, I remember when I had to get rid of my Jesus complex. Okay, that's a rescuer. Thinking I could save my addict sponsees. I can help. I cannot save. That's his job. Yes, we can help. We cannot save. Okay. Still, Bill, I want to talk about that in a bit. And if I seem to forget, please remind me, because that's very important. We can help. We cannot save. All right. Janine, welcome. Good to see you. It seems that in the service of living up to the image we've created of ourselves, we think we have to be consistent. Hard to make a meaningful change, but worth it, especially for a recovering masker. A recovering masker. Yeah, I certainly am that. Absolutely. We think we have to be consistent. Now, the qualities of the rescuer are many and varied. Number one, rescuers are among the most loving, the most caring people around. They just are. They're astute, they know how to problem solve, and they have an intuitive notion of what people need. And these are admirable qualities. It's good to be tuned in. It's good to be aware of your surroundings. It's good to want to make other people comfortable. But again, it's the intensity with which we do that and the degree to which we do that. Michelle V, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Kathy, do you think people often rescue others? Do you think people often rescue others tend to have anxious attachment styles, such as fearing rejection and seeking validation through helping others? The answer, Michelle, is a resounding yes. Yellow highlighter, yes. And so let's get into that. What does the rescuer experience? The rescuer experiences a pretty deep-seated need to be needed. And when the rescuer can take care of someone's needs, resolve someone's problem, meet their needs, they feel a sense of validation and they feel a sense of worthiness. The problem is, and Michelle, you hinted at it there, is they feel that they are only as lovable, and this is the core, they are only as lovable as the good they do for others. So yes, this is an anxious attachment. As long as I'm helping you, helping others all the time, Janine, consistently all the time, then that's my insurance policy against being left or left behind. That's my insurance policy. That's how I hedge against the possibility of being rejected. And it looks on the surface, it looks either benign or wonderful. Wonderful. It looks like someone's being helpful. And again, nothing wrong. But from the inside, when this is the only way one can feel valued, then one is living in kind of a trap, because how much room is there to have needs yourself? In fact, I've experienced that one of the, I'll tell you, one of the most, what word should I use? Off-putting things you can say to a rescuer is call them needy. In some way, call them needy. That is really an affront to the rescuer because of these layers that have been built onto the public image. So I'm not needy. I help you because you're needy. When I say you, I mean the collective you. And I have to say, in the interest of complete disclosure, I tell you, I don't think there's a therapist around, but I'm just going to speak for myself. But I think it goes for all therapists, people in the helping profession. I certainly have this. And I can tell you it's why I got into this profession to begin with. Now, I think and I hope that all my therapeutic work has helped me to become more flexible and to lighten up my need to rescue. But I can tell you that I got into this profession because I felt that I didn't want to be needy. And I didn't want to be needy because my mom, some of you have heard me talk about my mom. Mom, if you're listening, I love you. And I appreciate everything you did, but you were technically off in a few ways. And one of those ways was when I went to my mother with a need that I had, such as a childhood stutter, my mother would tell me to stop my nonsense. Stop your nonsense. You know whether you can say the word or not. Mommy, can you test me with flashcards to make sure I can say the word? Stop your nonsense. Stop your nonsense. Now, truth be told, I came to understand this later in life. My mom was very overwhelmed and didn't have the bandwidth to do those kinds of things with me. But as an 8-year-old, as a 10-year-old, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. All I knew was, and the conclusion I drew was, my needs make me needy, first of all, and my needs make me kind of a nuisance. And my needs are nonsensical. So what does a child do? If A equals B, then B equals C, and that is, I'm going to cover up the needy part of me because there's no one here to meet those needs. So I'm just going to rely on myself. And I'm going to spot, this is the interesting thing. I'm going to spot, because I have some kind of X-ray vision. This is what happens when we have masks. All the other children back then, and as I grew, all the other people who have needs, I can help them. I saw myself as above them, quite honestly. I don't like to admit that, but that's the way I saw myself back then. I'm above that neediness. Those hugs, those kids who get hugged by their mom, those hugs are for the needy girls. I don't need that. And, you know, when I was in high school and I learned that there was actually a profession that kind of plugged into, I don't have to talk about myself. I don't have to think about myself. I just have to concentrate on other people's needs and problems. That resonated with me so deeply that I knew that was the profession for me. Now, as I said, I have backed away from that, and you know, uh, I think I've worked that through a lot. Although I still have to remind myself from time to time. But as Bill says, one of the ways of working through this mask is understanding that helping is one thing, supporting is one thing, and these are beautiful things. But saving people from themselves, and I'm not talking about every so often if someone is in a crisis. Of course, you want to step in. Of course, there may be something you can do that is tangible, that is concrete, that will help that person. Okay. Bill, you talked about addiction. Yes, there are many ways in which people can step in. We've all heard of interventions. But we can't save people from their own life lessons, their own journeys, nor should we. Nor should we. So, as a therapist, I've come to understand that I can support others into looking into themselves. I can encourage, I can accompany other people, my clients and others, into looking deeply into themselves and coming in touch with their truths and their vulnerability. I can't spare them from that. And in fact, if I could, which I can't, but even if I could, it would be cheating the other person of their own opportunity to handle themselves and master themselves. So I hope you're with me until now. We're going to take a short break in a moment, but here we are kind of teeing up to understand when we come back from the break what kinds of things might have predisposed you or someone you know to wear this particular mask, and what can be done to, really, in an empowered way, look beneath the masks. This one, the mask of rescuer, look beneath and tap into the opportunities that exist beneath the surface. Which brings me to, what are the ways in which rescuers rescue? Well, they rescue by, I have a little list here. They rescue by intervening, by doing favors for everyone, by picking up the slack for people, taking on other people's responsibilities, providing unlimited emotional support, covering for other people's mistakes, can also be called enabling, and sacrificing their own needs. This is what I mean about, although rescuers tend to be very giving and very altruistic, this mask goes beyond that. As I said before, it's really a compulsion to be this way, because this is the way rescuers feel accepted, and they feel loved and validated and wanted. So when you think about that, that's a pretty hefty weight. Um, that that behavior is fueled by some pretty deep needs, because we all need to feel validated. We all need to feel loved. The rescuer's insurance policy is, you're going to love me as long as I am out there swooping in, taking care of everybody. And to Michelle's V point earlier, it's an anxious attachment. It's an attachment, but it's anxious because, hey, if I don't do that, if I'm unable to, heaven forbid if I don't want to. The thing about the rescuer is they may not want to, but they very rarely decline an opportunity to help in the ways in which I'm describing. So it's an anxious attachment because there's an uh-oh, if I can't, you're going to leave me. You're not going to like me. You're not going to hold me in as high regard. There's some danger, some threat that comes with that dynamic. So this is what I mean. It's a compulsion. I have to be this way or else. Now, how did this mask get developed in the first place? Well, like all the other masks, they started somewhere in childhood, and they began with some kind of unmet need or needs. Chances are that the rescuer had a parent or parents or caregivers who were compromised in some way. Maybe a parent died. Maybe there was um, a divorce that was contentious and the co-parenting was not as one would hope. Um, Maybe the parent or parents were addicted or immature or psychologically ill or emotionally unavailable or addicted, on and on and on, where the child was either thrust into the role, this is important, or took it upon herself to take care of that parent. Now, we talked about this last time with the mask of I'm fine or the overly self-reliant. Actually, this is where the masks overlap. Um, the parent or caregiver was compromised in some way. But in the case of the rescuer, the child became a little hero or a little heroine. The 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 child was a little man, the little man of the house, or the girl. I mean, I know these are gender stereotypes, forgive me, but it's just too cumbersome the other way. So in the interest of smoothness here, I'll say him and her. Um, they became the adult in the home. In psychology, this is called the parentified child. The child becomes like a parent, and they were rewarded for being an adult way before their time, for being a caregiver way too prematurely. And the compromised parent allowed this and perhaps needed this. And so there you had a dynamic take hold where this child grew up in that belief. The child doesn't even recognize it as a belief. It's just the way life is. That's my role. That's how I interact with people. That's what I know how to do. They are little heroes. Now, as I said before, these people often go into the helping professions. Right here, I'll put myself right at the top of the list. And we need these people. We need EMTs. We need nurses. We need pastors. We need people in the helping profession. Absolutely. But ideally, we also want to be flexible enough to call it like it is and to be authentic and to say, this is how I'm really feeling. And to say at other times, I'd love to help this person, but I'm going to opt out just this time. Or I'm going to support this person into helping themselves. This is what Bill was getting at rather than saving. It's better to teach someone how to rely on themselves where possible. Now, the rescuer has a secret. But what am I seeing in the chat here? I'm seeing in the chat, Michelle V is writing JP, JP, JP. I don't know what that means. So I don't know if that's anything Kathy, can you speak to how trauma might contribute to developing this mask? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me just continue with this and then I'll jump to that. Well, actually, it's interwoven. Because the parent is compromised, by the way, commercial for trauma. There are big T traumas and little T traumas. And if you want to read the absolute, one of the best works on trauma, Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body Keeps the Score. And this is the definitive book on trauma. So it's not an easy read. It's not something you read before you go to bed. But it's really an invaluable resource. The Body Keeps the Score. And he talks about how trauma gets locked in the body. Big T trauma, an event that is monumental, could be a divorce, could be a death in the family, death of a parent, death of a sibling, an illness, a natural disaster, something like that. Big T trauma. And that trauma really, there's a lot to it, but basically the trauma gets locked in the body and the person, it's not only what happened to the person, but it's what happened after the trauma that gets locked in the body. So big T trauma. Little T trauma refers to events or circumstances that you might regard as less major, more minor, but that are experienced by the person, let's say the child, as happening outside of their control. Something they didn't like, something that was very uncomfortable, and they didn't have any say in the matter. That circumstance, pardon me, might have been a protracted circumstance. It might have been a family dynamic, like a parent's emotional unavailability. That's not an epic event, but it's a constant thread that runs throughout the child's life. And so you have a child who compensated for that trauma or dealt with it by becoming a little adult and taking care of the parent or the caregiver. And a very interesting intention is behind that for many children, and that is they felt that their best chance of optimizing the parent's caretaking ability was to bolster them up, was to help them. Hey, if daddy's coming home intoxicated and he's, mom is on edge and, I'm very uncomfortable and I'm afraid he's going to yell and on and on and on. I'm going to internalize that and I'm going to try to be on my best behavior. I'm not going to burden dad or mom, maybe especially mom. Mom has enough to deal with. So I'm going to be a little mature person and I'm going to do what I can to intervene and take care of her. That's how I'm going to handle my trauma, perhaps, of having an addicted parent. Okay, the same goes for an unemotional parent or a parent who's ill, or if one parent dies and the other parent is struggling financially or struggling emotionally. Can you start to understand how in the mind of a child, their role, it becomes prescribed for them? I think it's a very interesting, very fascinating phenomenon that begins to dictate how that young person who grows into an adult walks the earth, how that person has relationships, who that person chooses to be in relationship with. So yes, trauma, the kind of attachment we have, all plays into this. Now, the rescuer has a secret. And the secret is they feel validated on the surface. But they only feel that until the next opportunity comes where they can save someone. Because if they don't, I always say, they have one foot on a banana peel, to disappoint someone. And if they feel they have disappointed someone, they really go through an intra-psychic crisis, because they fear that they will lose that person. That person will withdraw. This all goes on, usually in the unconscious. And the person doesn't know why they feel so on edge or so tired. Well, these are some of the reasons. So on the surface, they feel validated, they feel worthy. But here's the secret. The rescuer also feels a bit empty inside. Why? Because they're longing to be taken care of. Now, if you were to approach a rescuer and say, do you want to feel taken care of? They won't know what you're talking about. They're so conditioned. And as I said before, there was no opportunity to receive in childhood. So consciously, they may not know what you're talking about, but on some level, this will ring true. They're really yearning to lean on someone. This is the secret. They're yearning to lean on someone, but they can't. Why? Because they don't know that they have that need. And B, even when that need kind of shows up, it's very hard for them to trust anyone else's competence. So imagine that bind. Inwardly, they feel a little hollow because, part of feeling enriched is receiving the goodness that is around us. It is loving and accepting love in return. So if that's not a two-way street, there is going to be some hollowness as a result. And I know from talking to so many clients over the years, they want nothing more than to finally be able to exhale and know that someone has their back. Someone will say, it's okay, I've got it. You go do what you need to do for yourself, or you go and relax. It's a very weighty thing. I'm seeing other comments, so before I continue, still Bill, I tell my sponsees that as much as I'd like to, I can't do it for you, but I can show you how I did it. Exactly. I think using oneself for the betterment of others, describing your journey, I think is sometimes the best medicine. Claudia, welcome. Good to see you, Claudia. I like Michelle's question. I would be interested in the answer to that question. Did I not answer that question? Was that the question on attachment or trauma? I'm not sure. Claudia, if you're still with me, can you give me a hint as to what question you'd like me to answer if I haven't already done so? Dawn is saying Gabor Mate is another excellent resource on trauma. Yes, he also wrote some excellent books. The name is escaping me. I have it right on my shelf. It was on trauma, and I think you did answer it after I placed my question. Okay, good. It is in becoming the little hero or the little heroine, which is how the child tried to deal with, as we say, resolve the trauma for herself, that this pattern was born. So what can the rescuer do to become less rescuey and become more integrated? Well, as is the case with every mask, and as I believe is the case with healing in general, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to, with support, I think it's very difficult to do this alone. And I think it's not only is it difficult, but it's also hard to look outside of our blind spot. And when we talk about masks and we talk about compensating for the trauma we experienced as children, we don't know anything outside of that way of coping. So it's hard to do anything differently with ourselves. It takes another person. That's why I'm a big believer in psychological insight. These wounds occurred from an interpersonal failure or breach, and I believe they can only be healed by an interpersonal correction. That's my position. Therefore, what can be done to start to loosen the mask? Well, we go back to the home movies, as I like to say. We rewind those early days. So for me, as an example, I would look at the times, and I remember them vividly, believe me, when I said to my mother, "Mommy, can you help me with my stutter because I got scolded and punished today at school when I couldn't say a word?" And my mother said, "Stop your nonsense." I have to kind of run that movie, freeze frame that that image. I have to look at myself as an 8-year-old, and I have to talk to her and relate to her as if I walked in the room now as the adult I am. And I have to say to her, or I have the opportunity to say to her, not stop your nonsense, not cut it out, not rely on yourself. You know whether you can do it. No. But to say what any of you would say to my young self. Of course I'll help you. Of course I'll help you. I'd love to help you. Here, let's do this. Let's do it together. That is what those who do inner work refer to as corrective parenting, reparenting ourselves. We go into that movie as the adults we are today with our wisdom and our intelligence and our insight, and we relate to that child with love, with empathy, with interest, with compassion, with protection. We do that. And by the way, this is not to indict anyone at all. This is not to indict any caregiver who was compromised. Okay, they did the best they could. But the best they could, in many cases, simply was not what we needed. So we can accept that they did the best they could, but that's only part of the story. The rest of the story is then giving to ourselves what we needed from our caregivers. And so we go in and we mentally treat ourselves with that compassion. You don't have to be a big girl. You don't have to cover up. You say to yourself today, it's okay that you're frightened. It's okay that you're worried. It's okay that you don't know the answer. It's okay that you feel overwhelmed. We're going to try to do something about that. I'm not going to let you, hang out in that space. But it doesn't make you any less lovable. It doesn't disqualify you from being a good person, a worthy person. You're good and worthy because you were born. You are valuable because you exist. Full stop. But we live in a culture that tells us otherwise, and that's where the problem begins. So this is why I say it is the relationship we have with ourselves that underlies all the rest. Because the relationship I have with my inner child, if instead of being punitive and marine-like and, doing this, being angry, being frustrated, pointing a finger, if instead I say to my young self, I want to hear from you. I want to know what you feel. You have all the room here to be who you are. That will instantly connect us with our deepest truth. And then something happens that frankly does not tickle. When you tap into the need that you had and you instantly realize the caregiver couldn't meet that need, you will instantly feel some pain. I'm not joking. How could you not? But you feel the pain, but it doesn't do you in. Why? Because you're there having your own back. You're there to catch yourself. Mom couldn't do that. She just wasn't equipped for this reason or that. But I'm here to tell you, and this is not hokey. This is not pretense. This is as sober as it gets. I'm here to tell you, I'm here to tell myself that what I felt as an 8-year-old going to school and scared and all of that was appropriate to the situation. My fear, my needs were age appropriate. It was my mom who was off kilter. And then the next step is usually compassion and empathy for the caregiver. But it doesn't, you don't empathize with the other at the expense of yourself. You empathize with yourself and then the caregiver. And in this mix of being truthful, getting still, being honest with yourself about what you needed, noting how the caregiver couldn't give it to you, but then saying he or she couldn't, but I can give it to myself now. That mix, almost instantaneously, if done in an atmosphere of support with a supportive person whom you trust, who is steadfast and trustworthy, I promise you what will happen is right there, you become more integrated. It is a phenomenon. It is the essence of psychotherapy. It is what integration is made of, psychological integration. And what that means is I no longer stand apart from my young self. I am one with her. And then I don't have to worry about who's going to find me out. Why? Because there's nothing to find out anymore. I'm not living in hiding. I'm admitting my vulnerability. No one can hurt me with that. No one can use it against me. If they try, it's not going to do anything because I am straight with myself. I'm good with myself. I am accepting of myself. And so in these last 2 minutes, I want to say that is the gift we give to ourselves when we work on the most important relationship we have, which is the relationship with ourself. And once we do that, something miraculous happens beyond what I said before. Beyond that, we are then an open channel to the all of the all, to the unlimited source that exists, to the essence, to God, to universe, to spirit. We are open to that. We feel a part of that. And then what do we have to worry about? If we plug into that, who's going to touch us in the way in which we were so fearful before? Okay? It's such a powerful thing. I hope this comes through. And not only that, I have so many not onlys because one thing leads to the next. When we do this, when we carry ourselves in this energy, we automatically give other people permission to do the same because everything I say works coming and going. It's a two-way street. As we give ourselves permission, we give others permission. Okay, I see. Hi, Leandra. Thank you so much. You're welcome. You're welcome. I see Dawn has something and Claudia has something. I can't answer them now. We're out of time, but I will read them and maybe work them in to next week's episode. Thank you so much. Listening to you helps me understand myself better and others as well. That is music to my ears. That makes my gills much less green tonight. So I thank each and every one of you for listening now live and listening in the coming weeks to this broadcast. Thank you so much. You honor me with your presence. Let's go out there, and as Still Bill reminds us, let's help whoever we can, but let's not get hung up on saving them. Let's save ourselves, because in so doing, we will be much more valuable to ourselves and to everyone else who crosses our path. Take good care. You've been listening to Who Do You Think We Are on New Thought Media Network. Until next week, take good care of yourselves. See you then.